So if you're a championship contender, you're probably going to be well positioned to maybe, just maybe, win the national championship too. This group might surprise some. There is a notable exclusion from this group, and I think people are going to let me hear about it. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today's Monday, July 22nd. We hope that you're enjoying the show wherever you're coming to us from, whether it's Spotify, the Apple Podcast platform, or the ESPN YouTube channel. I'm Greg McElroy, alongside the same crew as always, Mark Kubiak, Jack Foster, Jake Garcia. Today we're going to have some fun. We've found that in the absence of divisions, when trying to piece this thing together, when piecing together the college football landscape, for a while, it was pretty simple. Like, you'd group teams based on what division they were in. Well, first you'd start with conference, then you'd group by division, and then you'd assess who really is a championship contender. But now it's kind of a little bit different. It's a little bit different because it's almost like we need to take all the teams, put them into one pie. We'll still break them up by conferences, but it's almost tier-based when it comes to how we should evaluate these teams. Hey, these are the championship contenders. Here's the teams that can make a college football playoff. Here's the teams that can ruin people's seasons and probably win 8 or 9 games. Here's the teams that should get to bowl eligibility. Here's the teams that could get to bowl eligibility. And if they do get to bowl eligibility, that would be a tremendous season. So we're kind of starting to kind of break it up like that. And then, honestly, the bottom tier would be you have no chance at a bowl game. Just play the spoiler in one big game. You have a one-game season. Let's say, for instance, you're Vanderbilt. You beat Tennessee. That's a win. Something along the lines of that. So we're going to do that for the conferences the next few shows. Today, in honor of them getting underway at their media days, we're going to dive into the Big Ten. So without much further ado, let's dive in to the tiers that exist inside the Big Ten Conference. Big Ten tiers. And this is actually a very interesting practice. As I started to go through it, the Big Ten, there's so many teams, first and foremost. It's a little bit more challenging this year than it's been in years past. It's like, I don't really know what's going to ultimately win in this league. Will it be the ground and pound trench play that's won in the past? Or will it be perhaps an athletic group that can create opportunities on the outside and win one-on-ones? This is a little bit more challenging. I look at the SEC, for example. We spent all week last week on the SEC, and I think I can kind of predict a little bit better with more accuracy what's going to win in the SEC, because I look at the additions of Oklahoma and Texas, and they play a style that's somewhat similar to what's been played in the SEC for the last decade. In the Big Ten, the style that's won in some cases is not necessarily reflected with the new additions. Like, USC is very different from Iowa. Iowa's been very successful in the Big Ten for a long time. Wisconsin, maybe not last year, but looking a certain way, running the ball, establishing the line of scrimmage, playing great defense, shortening the game, complementary football, like that won for a long time. Well, that's very different from what we saw from Washington last year. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to pinpoint exactly how these tiers line up. And I look forward to revisiting these when we fast forward to the end of the season and see how this ultimately all played out. So, tier 1, these are the championship contenders. And I would go as far as to say not just Big Ten championship. I think if you win the Big Ten, you're probably good enough to win the whole dang thing. So if you're a championship contender, you're probably going to be well positioned to maybe, just maybe, win the national championship too. This group might surprise some. There is a notable exclusion from this group, and I think people are going to let me hear about it. But I digress. Let's start at the top. I've been on the record. Should come as no surprise. I think Ohio State has the fewest question marks coming into this upcoming season. I think they are the best team in the Big Ten. And I understand that Michigan's had their number. I understand that there have been moments in the last couple of years in which you're kind of left scratching your head. I understand that some people have characterized the Ohio State group collectively as a group that's not as physical as they need to be as competitive as they can be in the Big Ten. I think that goes by the wayside this year. I look at the additions that they've made in the portal. I look at the 1-2 punch they have at running back. I think look quality and the depth that they've had at wide receiver for as long as I can remember, and the returnees that they have on defense at all three levels. And I think Ohio State is in a great spot. A great spot. That's why I would have them at number 1 in the country coming into the season. And I look at the additions of Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins. Sure, I have some question marks about the offensive line, but I have question marks about the offensive line for a lot of folks. So that's why I'm not going to hold it against Ohio State as much as I might at other places, because I think Ohio State can win in spite of having an elite offensive line. So very optimistic on the Buckeyes. They are obviously in Tier 1 national and conference championship contenders. Also a conference championship contender, the Oregon Ducks. Of course, brand new to the league. But if you look at their roster and how they've been constructed, I think Dan Lanning evaluated his group and said, it's not going to make a difference whether we're playing in the Pac-12, SEC, Big Ten. It's not going to matter. This style of play will win everywhere. And it did for the most part last year. Yes, they lost 2 games last year. The good news is Washington is not on their schedule more than once next year, at least at the moment. And given what we anticipate from Jedd Fisch, we think that will be the only matchup between Oregon and Washington next year. You look at how it went last year, too, missing 3 fourth-down attempts, twice at the goal line. Field goals might have made the difference. And then the rematch in Vegas, blown fourth-quarter lead, inevitably giving the Pac-12 title to Washington and watching Washington make it all the way to the national championship. Oregon was this close last year. You look at Bo Nix, yeah, he's gone. In comes Dylan Gabriel. You look at the couple pieces lost in the receiver corps, no problem. Transfers in Evan Stewart, most of the others are back. You look at the offensive line, a group that was very solid across the board from left to right last year, many of which are back this upcoming year. Yes, they'll miss their center, but they'll be fine. Defensively, biggest question mark, you have a lot of second-year players that are going to be anticipated to take the next step. Will they? I think they will. Some people think they might. I don't know many that don't think they will at all. They're going to be in a really good spot. So Oregon, without question, year 1 championship contenders in the Big Ten. I am also going to add one more team. It's not the team that you think. It's not the defending national champions. I'm adding the Penn State Nittany Lions to Tier 1 in the Big Ten. Now, a lot of reasons to look at why Penn State has no business being in this conversation. I understand what their record is against Michigan and Ohio State. I understand how their offense performed last year against both those two teams. I understand the challenges that James Franklin has had playing against top-tier competition his whole career. I get all those things, but I look at their roster. I look at what they return. I look at what should be an improved receiver core. I look at a better offensive system for the modern day. With all due respect to Mike Yurcich, I think Andy Kotelnicki is an improvement in that position because Andy Kotelnicki just went to Kansas and Buffalo prior to that and Wisconsin Whitewater prior to that and did more with less for a really long time. Well, now he's got more. So he's going to do more with more? Hopefully so. That's the goal for James Franklin heading into 2024. They'll be very creative. They will acknowledge and respect the other opponent's strengths and will not play into those strengths. They'll try to identify weaknesses and they'll do whatever they have to do to attack those weaknesses. That's what I think is going to be really beneficial about this addition. I also look too at what they bring in on the defensive side. They didn't need much help over there. Let's be real. They did not need a whole lot of help, but in comes Tom Allen, a guy that's had a lot of success, not just in the Big Ten, but anywhere he's been a coordinator in the past. And I think there's going to be minimal drop-off from where Manny Diaz had that group playing last year on defense to where they're going to be playing this year on offense. I think the coaching staff has improved drastically. James Franklin is James Franklin. That's who he is. But his coordinators, I think it was basically plug and play on defense. Diaz for Allen, no drop-off. But on the offensive side, Kotelnicki stepping in for Yurcich. I do like the growth that's to be expected there. They're going to do a lot of things, I think. A lot of things. And while I look at just how the structure of the Big Ten has adjusted, East versus West, Penn State resided in the Big Ten East. Nobody in college football has benefited more from getting rid of divisions than the Penn State Nittany Lions. Nobody, not a single team in college football. Some could say LSU, some could say Auburn, some could say Michigan State, some could say Ole Miss. I think Penn State, think about how many different reasons why Penn State benefits from shedding divisions, and look at how the landscape has shifted. Think about how many times Penn State would have been within striking distance of the playoff in the last few years that the 12-team format existed. It didn't, but now it does. Penn State's really well positioned. They are a Tier 1 conference and national championship contender in the Big Ten. Let's move on to Tier 2. Notice there's a legitimate omission in Tier 1. And the Michigan Wolverines fans, they've forgotten to an extent that we were early to the party here at Always College Football. We were telling you all season long throughout 2022, when CJ Stroud and company were just running roughshod through the Big Ten, that Michigan has the recipe. I'm telling you, Michigan is the superior team. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that. We picked Michigan to win the Big Ten that year. We picked them to win last year. We picked them to win the national championship last year. Like, we've been all over the Michigan Wolverines for the last handful of years. Okay? So you can't sit here and say that we're Big Ten homers, we're Buckeye homers, we're drinking the Kool-Aid for the Pac-12 newcomers. Like, no, we're not. We're not at all. We have been pro-Michigan for the entirety of this podcast's life. The problem is, this Michigan is not the Michigan that took the field the last 2 years. So they are in Tier 2 to start the season, which qualifies as a college football playoff contender. They can make the playoff, but I am not confident at this point that they can win the national championship. I look at just how things have set up for Michigan, and we're going to find out week 2. Look, they play Texas week 2. All right, we're going to know all we need to know about the Michigan Wolverines in week 2. And after that game, in victory, maybe the narrative will flip drastically. But you look at last year's team, and that was a culmination of multiple years building up to the moment in which they finally broke down the door, won in the playoffs, and then went on to win the national championship. So this was a 3-year stretch from 21, 22 to 23 where they peaked, and now back to the drawing board a little bit as far as rebuilding is concerned. I think the defense has a chance to be elite, okay? The defense is so stout. Yes, they lost 5 guys at the draft last year. I don't care. You look at how many guys they played, that is not the side of the ball that I'm concerned about at all. They will be perfectly fine on the defensive side. Here's the problem, is where they've made their hay the last couple of years, where they excelled, where they were better than anybody, was along the line of scrimmage offensively. And while they've won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row, they lost 6 guys to the NFL draft. Zach Zinner, Trevor Keegan, Ladarius Henderson, Trente Jones, Carson Barnhart, Drake Nugent. They lost 4,200 snaps and 5 all Big Ten players along the offensive line. The guy that has the most experience returning for Michigan has 4 starts under his belt. That's a problem. That's a concern. So the strength of your team the last couple of years offensively is no longer there. Now, are they going to be good along the offensive line? Probably. They're still Michigan. It's still Sharon Moore's team, even though he's the head coach now. I think he still probably has a hand in what they're doing offensively. Still has a hand in what they are along the line of scrimmage. But offensive line is a legitimate question mark, which is crazy considering we're talking about the back-to-back Joe Moore Award winners. The other position that is concerning is quarterback. And I understand very much that people have said, well, Michigan won without having to have a game changer at quarterback the last couple of years, and that J.J. McCarthy simply managed the game. While all that is true, J.J. McCarthy wasn't asked to do as much as some of his counterparts for the Buckeyes or some other places. When a play needed to be made, J.J. McCarthy made the play, a la national championship game. 3rd down and 9, backed up in his own end. If they don't get it, they're punting from their own end zone. Well, what does he do? He scrambles for a 30-yard gain. Next possession, after they flip the field, big play in the game, big moment in the game, finds Loveland over the middle, big play that really kind of broke the dam for the Washington Huskies. I look at the quarterback spot, and I am really concerned. Now, Jack Tuttle has been around for a while. I know he's going to be in mix. Alex Orji, I know he's unbelievable as an athletic option, but there needs to be a massive jump in accuracy and a massive jump in consistency throwing the football. I look at Denegal. I understand that he's a solid, very sharp passer. I get that. Jaden Davis, blue chip prospect. All right, blue chip prospect, but young. Davis Warren, former scout teamer. Like, I look at all these guys and then I see 5 going into the fall that are in the mix for the quarterback spot, and that's concerning to me. It's the most important position in the sport, and you have question marks. And I don't think any of the solutions at the position are a bona fide slam dunk no-doubter. And like I said, we'll reassess after week 2. If all of a sudden quarterback's not a concern and they're just running it right down the middle and just pounding Texas to the line of scrimmage, we will change the narrative very quickly on Michigan. But right now, I have concerns. And right now, I have doubts. That's why they reside right now as a college football playoff contender, but I don't envision them as a legitimate national championship contender coming into this year. Another team that I put into this category, the Iowa Hawkeyes. I think they are a legitimate college football playoff contender, but I don't view them as a team that can legitimately win the national championship. Now, some people will kind of look at their offense and they'll say, well, things are boring and stagnant and they're not exciting to watch. Well, that's fine. They've won 2 of the last 3 Big Ten West crowns. They have a super elite defense. They play into that defense, and they acknowledge what they had. They had an All-American at punter. They won the hidden yardage. They won field position. They won turnover margin. Like, they understand how to win in spite of an offense that doesn't take a lot of unnecessary risks. Now, if Iowa decided to open it up and become air raid, would that be beneficial to their defense? Probably not. I don't think it would be at all. And if they decide to open it up, start throwing all over the yard, and they're not shortening the game, is their defense going to be ranked in the top 5? Probably not, because they're going to be on the field more, which means they're going to have to defend more, which means they're probably going to have fatigue factor in a little bit more. But either way, we're talking about a team that won 10 games last year. 8 of those 10 wins came when their offense had less than 300 yards. Okay, that's crazy. They also won 4 games while scoring 15 or fewer points. It's the most by any team since 1991. Now we know, fast forwarding to this year, they're still going to have a great defense. You know they're going to play great complementary football. You know they're going to grind it out as best they can. And maybe, just maybe, they start to become a little bit better, just a little bit better on the offensive side of the football. They can't be a whole lot worse. And maybe it can find them back into, say, 8, potentially 9 wins. And if you get 9 wins in the Big Ten, you're in the mix. Plus, you look at the Big Ten schedule, I think it's pretty favorable. Look at the top 6 teams in the league. If you're going to line them all up, Iowa plays just 1. So I think Iowa actually has a real chance this year to make a little noise. Now, like I said, would love to see them be a little better on offense, but at this point, that is difficult for me to totally get on board with. Let's go to tier number 3. Tier number 3, I would qualify as teams that can win 8 or 9, but they're probably not going to be in the playoff mix. They're probably not going to be knocking on the door, but they're going to be drastically improved, and they could ruin someone's season. Okay? We will start with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And if you look at just what this program has become, look, I am a child of the 90s. There was a time in which I didn't think Nebraska would ever lose a game. They now have the longest bowl drought in the Power 5, in the Midwest at least. You would think that'd be Kansas, no longer Kansas, it's Nebraska. There's 3 reasons why Nebraska struggled last year, okay? There were a million examples in the last handful of years in which they've had close losses, all right? They lost 5 games by 1 score last year. That means they've had 30 one-score losses in the last 6 years. 3 times they lost by a 13-10 final score. That's crazy when you think about it. So to have 31 score losses over the course of 6 years, that's not a trend. That's a pandemic. They have to get that alleviated. And hopefully Matt Rule can change the culture enough so that when things get close at the end of the game, they will bow up and make that play that pushes them over the edge and ultimately results in victory. But that can't be the case anymore. Number 2, turnovers. 31 turnovers last year. offense, the worst in college football. Minus 17 turnover margin, the worst in the Power 5. All right. They've been one of the worst turnover programs for a long, long time now. That has got to adjust. A million different times we've seen Nebraska with an opportunity to make a play. Boom, pick. Nebraska secures momentum. They get the short field. Boom, fumble. Can't happen anymore. Absolutely can't happen. Then finally, they got to be better in the red zone. Second worst red zone scoring percentage and third worst field goal kicking percentage. That's not good enough. That is not good enough. Now, Matt Rule, we've seen over the course of his 10 years at both Temple and Baylor, year 2 is a big step. Year 3 is an even bigger step. And it appears like they're certainly heading in the right direction. And if they can get improved play at the quarterback spot with Dylan Raiola, who's, of course, a blue chip prospect who looks the part, who played the part, who had some really nice moments in the spring game, they could be really well positioned to make a leap. But all the way up to playoff contending status, I don't see it just yet. I see them in the spoiler category, which would be tier 3. They can certainly get to 8, but I'm not sure if they can crack the top 12 just yet. Wisconsin is next. Last year was a difficult year to kind of wrap your head around for Wisconsin, wasn't it? Tanner Mordecai breaks his hand. Braylon Allen missed a couple games. Ches Malusi goes down in September. An offense that you thought with the addition of Phil Longo would just take off. Hey, here's some new energy. I was all in on the Wisconsin bandwagon last year. Really believed the hype, had them in the top 15 in the preseason. Was totally wrong. Now, here's the positive. Things last year, for as bad as they got offensively, they averaged 23 points a game, which was good for 93rd. They also did not have a single receiver that posted a 100-yard game all season. There's no way they can't be better offensively than they were last year. In comes Tyler Van Dyke, who, granted, a lot of turnover issues at times with Miami. But if you look at how he played early in the year, there was a point last year, guys, where Tyler Van Dyke was in the top 3 or 4 or 5 in the country as far as QBR is concerned. And he played against A&M. It's not like he was playing against average competition. Like, he was playing against quality people in the first month of the season, and he was up there amongst the best in the sport as far as efficiency is concerned. So hopefully he will revert back to that version of himself, because it fell off a little bit there in the middle part of the season when he had some turnovers against Georgia Tech and he never could quite get it back. So here's hoping they have a little bit better play at the quarterback spot. The other thing too, they have a bunch of pieces back on defense, which means I think defensively they're going to be in a really good spot. Plus, it's year 2. Coaching staff now is solidified. I think they have a better understanding of what they might be up against. So I am cautiously optimistic that this group would, if the divisions were still in existence, be at or near the top of the Big Ten West. But without them being in the West, they're kind of in that tier 3 mold, where they can beat anybody they play, but they can also lose to teams that they probably shouldn't lose to, which is why I have them at around 8 wins or so. I think Wisconsin's going to be dangerous, but they're not yet contenders, which is why I have them in year number 3. Also in tier number 3, the USC Trojans. Now, I look at USC, and some people have them in the top 25. Some people have them in the top 20. I think they're still going to be able to score. I fully anticipate them being able to score, but it's in large part due to the fact that Lincoln Riley's always scored. They're always going to score. They're going to have weapons. They're going to have speed. They're going to have explosiveness. And maybe Zachariah Branch takes over games over and over and over again and route to a Heisman Trophy. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that scoring won't be an issue for the Trojans. I do know that defense has been an issue for quite some time. And I feel like we've beaten a dead horse. Okay. We've beaten a dead horse with SC. I know their defense is bad. The question is, can their defense get worse? No. In all likelihood, are they going to get way better under D'Anton Lynn? I would hope so. They were 117th in havoc rate. UCLA was when D'Anton Lynn took over. 117th in havoc rate. You know where they finished last year? That'd be 5th. For those keeping track at home, check my math here. 117th to 5th, that is a 112 spot improvement. Thereabouts. Pretty big jump. I look at when D'Anton Lynn took over at UCLA, they were 92nd in scoring. You know where they finished last year? 14th. In a league that was pretty dang good when it came to the different offenses that D'Anton Lynn had to face off against. I look at how they attacked the quarterback, the sacks, the adjustments, the pressure rate that they were able to create, and man, they took off by leaps and bounds. So while I look at last year's defense and think that Alex Grinch tried to do way too much, tried to dictate, think they were unsound, think they were not good tacklers, I think there were a lot of issues with last year's group, for sure. I think D'Anton Lynn is going to be a little bit simpler defensively. He's not going to go in and start recreating the wheel. But I also think simple, when you can oftentimes attract superior talent, isn't the worst thing in the world. If you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in, the 90s, all they did was run a defense called Tampa 2, which 2 safeties. Derek Brooks played the middle of the field. He was the middle linebacker. Middle linebacker just ran right to the middle of the field. And they really only rushed 4. Why? Because they had Warren Sapp, Booger McFarland, and others. You don't have to get too crazy defensively when you got great defensive personnel. And USC, while their defensive personnel is not what it once was, in all likelihood, with their NIL war chest, with their blue blood status, they should be able to recruit better than most teams that they're playing against. So therefore, they should be able to recruit superior personnel, which ultimately down the road should have them in a position to play better defense. Do they have to adjust how they practice? Probably. Are there other tweaks I would make? Sure. But at the same time, I still think USC has a chance down the road to be better. It just won't be this year. They're going to play the spoiler this year. They're going to create some problems for some folks. They're going to probably still be able to score with just about anybody, but I have questions about them holding up along both lines of scrimmage in the Big Ten, which is why I have them in Tier 3 at the moment. Moving on to Tier 4, these are teams that should make a bowl game. If they don't, it'd be a remarkable disappointment. We'll start with the national championship runner-up, the Washington Huskies. Now, Jed Fish is no stranger to rebuilding a program. He took over an Arizona team that was winless, took them to 5 wins, and then ultimately a top 12 ranking. All right, pretty dang good year for the Wildcats last year. They had their best season since 1998. Here's the problem. There are very few people back. Just 2 of 22 starters returned from last year's national championship. Tons of guys left in the portal. They had a ton of guys drafted. Coaching transition. They did bring in a couple pieces for sure. He brought with him a couple guys from Arizona, but it's hard for me at this point to anticipate them faring very well in the Big Ten. I think they can be problematic. I think there could be some weeks in which you don't want to play them. I think that'll be a very tough road trip for those that have to travel to Seattle to take them on. But at this point, anything beyond bowl eligibility would be pretty dang impressive. I think 6-7 wins for Washington at the bare minimum. I don't anticipate them missing a bowl game, but I also think this transition has a chance to be much more difficult. I'll also put into this category, which speaks to the job that Greg Schiano has done. Rutgers should go bowling this year. They won 7 games last year. That's their most wins since 2014. That was way back in their first year in the Big Ten. And Greg Schiano, now he's done it twice. Okay. He knows how to take a program that has really a lot of challenges. And here we are. Fast forward, they're a handful yet again. Their physical is all get out. They got a good offensive line, workhorse running back. And now it appears like maybe they've addressed their biggest issue from last year. Last year, the passing attack was woeful. Well, in comes Minnesota's Ethan Kaliakmanis. He's going to play for his former offensive coordinator, Kirk Ciarrocca. And there's reason to believe that this kid has enough juice. Like I remember doing a game of his a couple years ago. He started the wideout at Penn State. And granted, the receiver core at Minnesota, not great, but he can throw darts. He's got talent. And I think there's an immediate upgrade at the position because Gavin Wimsatt last year just missed way too many throws. They've already named him the starter. And you look at the schedule, Rutgers has maybe the most manageable schedule in the entire Big Ten. They're the only team in the league to miss on playing all of the best teams in the league. So I think they got a chance to really make a little bit of noise. I'd be shocked if they didn't go bowling. I almost was this close to maybe moving them up to the tier 3, but just didn't feel right. Not yet. Not at this point. Let's go next to Maryland. Maryland has not been a program that has had consistent, sustainable success. Well, 3 straight 7-win seasons is pretty dang impressive. All right. Mike Loxley's done a really good job there. Now, this does look like a little bit different type of challenge. Okay. I look at having to replace Talia Tagovailoa. I look at having to rebuild the offensive line from the get-go. I look at the fact their defense, which was solid, and their schedule, I think, is for the most part a little bit more manageable. Not quite as easy as Rutgers, but more manageable than most. And I would be surprised if Maryland didn't get back to 6 or 7 wins at the bare minimum. I think they should get there. I think they will get there. And I think there's enough juice and personnel and some explosiveness on that roster to make life difficult for some of the teams they'll face. Let's go next to Illinois. Now, Illinois, if you look back a couple years, the fact that they won 8 games in 2022 was pretty dang impressive. Granted, their defense was ridiculous that year. I mean, so good on that side of the ball. Had guys that were drafted off that roster. And then in 2023, they had to replace some big-time defensive linemen, big-time defensive backs. And now, fast forward, still did a lot of really good things. I think Brett Bielema is a good program builder. I think he has a good quarterback to build things around with Luke Altmaier. I would like to see them continue to play well defensively, even though last year their defense didn't look anything like the defense that they had in 22. How could you expect it to? Johnny Newton now is gone as well. Illinois is going to be a team that you don't really want to play, but they're also not going to be a team that really, really scares you at the top of the league. Should go bowling, no doubt about it, but how dangerous can they become? That's something that we'll have to address as the season moves along. Let's go next to Michigan State. That's right, Michigan State. I think Jonathan Smith has a chance to go to East Lansing and get them to the postseason immediately. Now, things 100% fell off a cliff. Okay, fell off the cliff towards the end of the Mel Tucker era. All right, they were recruiting in the portal and the buy-in wasn't there and just was a disaster at the end. It really was. So I look at what was built at Oregon State, one of the toughest jobs in America. And Oregon State was a physical nightmare to play against. They were a blue-collar, chip-on-the-shoulder type of outfit that were really, really bad when he took over. They went 7-29 prior to him taking over. Then he eventually took them from 2 wins to 5 wins to 7 wins, the third 10-win season ever. At one point, they went and beat the Oregon Ducks. That's right, that Oregon Ducks, coming back from a 4-touchdown deficit. They came back and beat them without ever throwing the football. So Michigan State could not have made a better hire considering what their expectations are. I think Jonathan Smith has proven over the course of his career to do more with less. They would anticipate nothing less than that when he takes over there in East Lansing for Sparty. Let's go next to Minnesota. Minnesota should bounce back. Last year was really, really bad. I mean, relatively speaking, really, really bad. But they bring back a veteran offensive line, a defense that brings pretty much everybody back, and a defense last year that, as far as production is concerned, everybody for the most part played. They last year just didn't really get things going, and it was pretty ugly, frankly, but I think they have a chance certainly to get into bowl eligible status this year. But it's going to require them knocking a team off or two you probably don't anticipate in the preseason. But I think with all the continuity returning, the pieces back from a year ago, they should be well positioned to get to the postseason. And then finally, the UCLA Bruins. Now, UCLA is not a team that I've had high hopes for this year, but as I start to dive in and I start to look at kind of what's back, they bring back, I think, a pretty decent contingent of skill players. I think they bring back offensive linemen that have a chance to kind of gel together. And I look too at the galvanizing force that would happen if your head coach left for another opportunity, a la Chip Kelly leaving to become Ohio State's coordinator offensively. That would be concerning. D'Anton Lynn also left, went to your arch rival across town. That can be a galvanizing situation. So I'm cautiously optimistic that UCLA might have slightly better personnel than people anticipate, and the transition into the Big Ten won't be as significant as some are painting it out to be. And then finally, this is tier 5. If these teams get to a bowl game this year, I would consider it to be a great accomplishment. We'll start with the team that had an incredible 8-5 season last year. That was the Northwestern Wildcats. A lot of the reason why last year was special is they had kind of built up to that season. Granted, they were 1-11 the year before. They were awful. 7-win jump to 8-5 was the best in the FBS from 2022 to 2023. But here's the problem. Acquisition of talent, whether it's the portal, whether it's high school recruiting, that's never been Northwestern's strong suit. So seeing the program really come together after Pat Fitzgerald's firing and rallying behind their interim coach, David Braun, kind of led you to believe, man, that was kind of a special collection of young men. Now they have to replace a lot of those guys. They have to replace a lot of those guys, and they just brought in a nationally ranked recruiting class that was 79th. That is the second worst in the Big Ten. Granted, now the Big Ten has expanded to 18 teams. So I thought last year's team was an incredible group. To recreate that success is going to be incredibly difficult. So if Northwestern can back up an 8-5 with another bowl appearance, I'd be really impressed by what David Braun and his staff was able to do. We'll go next to Purdue. Look, in 2022, Jeff Brom did something that was amazing. Being able to take that group to the championship at the Big Ten is something that's incredible. Here's the problem. You look at what was lost in the portal. They lost top 3 wide receivers, starting offensive linemen, All-American at defensive end and Nick Scorton to Texas A&M. The problem is the incoming talent doesn't necessarily match up with those pieces that left. So I still find myself looking at Purdue and feeling though, man, it's going to be hard for them to punch up this year. Maybe they can get to a bowl game. If they do, I would consider that to be a tremendous accomplishment. And then finally, the Indiana Hoosiers. Now, Curt Cignetti, he inherited some pretty tough spots in the past, right? Whether that's Division II jobs that he had when he took over at Elon, got both going over the course of time. He stepped into a great situation. James Madison just kind of kept the train rolling, but you saw how they transitioned from FCS to FBS, and they did really an amazing job in years number 1. Went 11-1, and everybody and their brother thought they should have gone bowling. Either way, they didn't. But Curt Cignetti now takes over at Indiana, where his hands will be full. So if he can get them to the postseason in year 1, that would be an incredible achievement. Not to be overlooked, but right now, a lot happening on the East Coast of the United States. That would be the ACC. Well, it used to be East Coast. Now it's both coasts. All Coast Conference, if you will. The ACC Media Days are going on, and I found this to be kind of an interesting flex. Let's take a peek at one of the signs that is currently residing outside ACC Media Days. I think that that's cool. While I would also say, too, though, not being disrespectful, this has nothing to do with the ACC. It really doesn't. But by acknowledging that you play the toughest non-conference schedule, aren't you also acknowledging the strength of other conferences? I just want to make sure we're on the same page there. So like when you go out and you tout the fact that North Carolina is playing in Minnesota week 1, aren't you also kind of tipping your cap towards the Big Ten? Aren't you also kind of tipping your cap in the direction of the SEC? With the non-conference games that your schools play at the end of the year, like Florida, Florida State, like Clemson, South Carolina. Isn't that what you're doing? Like, if anything, I would say, okay, great. We play a great non-conference game, but I kind of don't want to talk about that because, that's kind of saying that other teams in other conferences are really good and we're willing to play them. I don't know. We also play Notre Dame, who's an independent. 4 of our teams playing Notre Dame. I don't know. I just look at it and it's like, goodness gracious, did someone really okay that time? I feel like it was like one of those graphics. Remember these graphics that came out not that long ago? It's usually like around the Super Bowl. And I believe it was Penn State. I know it was Penn State. And Penn State put out a graphic that said, Penn State players have competed in every Super Bowl except 9 since 1958. Okay. Except 9 is like in tiny little itty bitty font. The rest of them. Penn State players have competed in every Super Bowl. That's kind of what we're doing right here, is it not? Who okayed that? Who okayed that graphic? I don't think it was a great call, but either way, hey, you got to give them credit. There are some intriguing non-conference games. I mean, Cal at Auburn, traditional ACC versus SEC game. Pitt at West Virginia, love that one. I wish that one resided on the schedule every single year. Virginia at Maryland, an intriguing game. Virginia Tech against Rutgers, intriguing game. They have a bunch that are in September by themselves. So a handful of games that are highly intriguing, but also weird flex, bro. No big deal. Also, Nick Saban is going to have his name attached to the field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Now, I look at this decision, and while I appreciate its significance, we've seen the same at the Swamp for Steve Spurrier. We've seen the field named after coaches because the stadium names have already been designated. I don't feel like this is enough. I'm glad it's a nice gesture. It's a really big honor, I would imagine, for Coach Saban to have his name on the field. We've seen the same thing. Bobby Bowden, I believe, has his name on the field. We've seen a bunch. This has been going on a bunch of different places. But for Nick Saban and what he's meant to the university, not enough. Bear Bryant has his name on every single thing in the entire campus. Streets and libraries and places to eat, dorms, Bryant Hall, Bryant Dorm, Bryant this, Bryant that. I love Bear Bryant. I have a ton of respect for him. There needs to be more for Nick Saban done, because him ushering in a new era of Alabama football was significant. But he didn't just change the football program. He also changed the university as well. Same can be said for a bunch of different schools, I would say. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Please like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. Really appreciate all of you that have come to us the last few weeks. We are ramping things up as we inch closer and closer to college football season. I think we're like 30 or some odd days away from things really getting underway. So we're very much looking forward to that, and we hope that you guys are excited about it as well. So for all of us here at Always College Football, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.